morning, my friends. It's been a little while. We've been taking a little break on the podcast here in the summer, done some traveling, kind of gotten back to a little bit of normal life after this crazy pandemic that still seems to be trying to hold on. But we're back with another episode of MyPilgrimage podcast. Today, we are answering and kind of referring to a question that was left by a good friend of the program, Jared Crawl. He is a MyPilgrimage guy. He's been there for a long time, and he left a question regarding programming about sexual performance and other issues on the Facebook group. And Seth thought it would be a good podcast. I agree. So we sat down, all the three of us, and had a good conversation about it. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. I hope you're, wherever you are, you're having a good time and you're enjoying your summer and you're finding some healing. If not, we're here for you, But please leave your comments, thoughts, questions, anything that comes up during this podcast. Leave it in the comments. I'll post this to the Facebook group, and hopefully it'll do some good. So, blessings, guys, and we'll see you next time. Enjoy the conversation. It's been a long time. We took a bit of a break on the podcast because, frankly, I've been traveling and doing other projects. But here we are. We're back. So what we'll do is let's give a little summer update, what the summer's been like, and then we'll get into the purpose of this podcast, which was a question that was posted by Jared on the Facebook group. So I want to get into the summer updates first. Jared, you go first, man. How has the summer been? What have you been up to? Anything interesting?
Yeah, this summer's been kind of crazy for me. I'm a tree planter up in Canada.
That's your job.
That's my job up in summer. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
You talk to the forest, bro.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. I was thinking a lot about this summer, actually, how I've definitely been a tree past lives. Big deal for me.
Right.
So I had some of those memories coming up for me this summer, but I also in this season in particular, I was part of a project called Treehab, which was hiring inmates to participate in some tree planting work.
Right.
So kind of a bit of rehab work and providing just equitable work for them. And so we had this idea, and it lasted a total of 2 weeks.
What happened?
Before it flopped. So just poor business planning. We learned a ton. I learned so much in those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we're kind of in the process of just like reflecting, debriefing that whole experience and see where it goes from there.
Sure.
But it was a powerful time. I've had to let go of a lot and shed a lot through that experience.
Right.
So that's kind of what I'm coming out of. And then I planted for another month with a different company. And now I've just returned to Vancouver Island to start work on a boat yard here in the town. I want to start learning about boats. So I'm taking a break from being in the forest, and I'm going to learn about how to look after boats here now. So some big changes, some tough failure, a lot of inadequacy coming up through that whole Treehab experience. But now, using that and shifting phases a little bit. So excited to be back on Vancouver Island now. It's gorgeous here today.
Dude, starting a new thing, coming up with a new idea and then starting a new thing. There's nothing harder. There's nothing more challenging. And every person who's ever started a business or even found any kind of success will tell you that they learned from all their failures the most. I mean, that's when it goes wrong or something unexpected happens or you just don't know what you're doing. That's the stuff you learn from, man. I can vouch for that 100%. So that's cool. I'm excited to see what the takeaways are going to be for that.
Yeah, some big stuff for sure. Yeah. Cool. It's the first time I've really gone for something like that full in. So some huge lessons, and I know more of what to expect for when I try it the next time.
Sure.
And some really good learning, especially amidst the team that we built to do that together.
Right.
Some conflict came up in some really powerful ways. So it was good.
Awesome. Seth, how you doing, man? How's your summer been? Tell us about what you've been up to.
Moving, man. We've been moving. We finally, after we left the apartment, that was probably the place where we became a family. We're almost 3 years in this tiny little apartment in a crazy part of town. And just last week, we finally moved into a house. And we are now in the madness of boxes and unpacking, but we got this killer little backyard situation and had our first barbecue yesterday with a bunch of friends over.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And we haven't hosted something like that and forever. So Sam brought all his kids over. Sam Vert of the MyPilgrimage group brought his 4 kids over, and my friends Mike and Jamie came over, and we just had a blast. And so it's been a bit of a whirlwind ever since the kids got out of school. But now we're, just unpacking, and I'm taking on my nemesis, which is hanging things. There aren't a lot of things in my life that trigger me. But hanging things. I don't know if it's a past life thing that I got hung. I know I think I was pretty sure I was crucified at one point in one of my past lives. Maybe that's part of the process. But hanging things is I have to approach it with a very meditative perspective, and I end up moving a lot of energy. And I can already feel little young parts of me showing up that I haven't maybe been aware of before, because I feel like a failure when I make a mistake that leaves a marred wall or something like that. And it's a strange process, man, for me.
Yeah.
And my wife is a homemaker in the truest sense of the word. She loves to just, in her mind, she sees and designs it and makes it beautiful. And so a lot of the requests are like, why would we do that? That's already there. Like, but that's not this thing. I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense. So I have to like crawl into this very meditative space and stuff. So I'm ready to do my work, and I'm ready, and I'm going to go through this thing. I go slow. So, and the thing is, I was going to hang all this weekend, but this weekend kind of got filled up, and she's like, are you unconsciously avoiding this? I'm like, no, I swear I'm not. But so anyway, that is the next inevitable phase. So there is Seth, pre-hang, and there's Seth post-hang. And so when we hit the post-hang stage, I will tell you guys, and we'll debrief or whatever. But yeah, that's my life is only about hanging things as of this moment. So
that's great.
And then occasionally my dog wanders off, and I have to drive around the neighborhood looking for him. So
that's great.
But yeah, it's been good, man. Life is really beautiful right now. So this week.
Yeah, you got a lot of hanging flowers behind you. That's awesome.
She's already doing that kind of stuff. She's just like, let's make this thing beautiful. She's set up a little coffee spot over there, and she's, we got the killer backyard thing going on, and really cool neighbors, and we've hit a sweet spot, man. Life is really good. Work is really beautiful right now. I'm cranking really hard. Lots of fascinating people, finding profound amounts of freedom. Lots of professional athletes. This is really fun. I really enjoy working with athletes. I think it's really unique. So
yeah, hey, tell us a cool story. Like, I mean, you don't have to use their names or anything. I know that's confidential, but you're working with pro athletes. You're working with some major league players, Major League Baseball players.
Yeah, Major League Baseball players, Major League Soccer.
You seen any cool stuff you want to share with the group that's just been really cool watching guys do this kind of work?
Yeah, I have a guy, he's a major league pitcher, and he's really fascinating. I've got all kinds of interesting cases right now, but it's fascinating for me because when I first started working with pro athletes, it's very easy for my ego to get attached to their performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that I've had to really do the work of letting go of that, because not with every athlete, it's really about emotional healing. And then I am fascinated by how that affects performance, but I've had to learn that that's not the point of it,
Right, sure.
And of course it does work its way into that. I mean, the goal is to find excellence in anything we do, whether it's tree planting or marketing or life coaching or professional sports, whatever it is, that we can be free to be our highest self in those spaces. And so when you have someone who's a super gifted athlete and working at the highest level of their craft, it should be an inevitable thing that their performance becomes something. But I've got a guy right now, he's a pitcher, but he's working through a major injury rehab. But he's been in the league for 8 years, and he's had 8 injuries. He's never finished a season with actually healthy. He's never literally had one single major league season. And he's one of these guys that's capable of winning a Cy Young, if he can stay healthy. But he finally kind of came to this point where he's like, this has to be, he said, there's something that's blocking me. There has to be something. I'm not, everybody just goes, well, you're just injury prone. That's not a thing. Like, there's a reason.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so him and I have been working into really, really deep trauma. And even though his injury rehab is so profound that he's 3 months in, he's got another year, it's called Tommy John surgery. So it's probably a year left. So he's the kind of guy, though, that I actually fully expect that when he comes back, he's going to absolutely blow people's minds.
Sure.
And so there's this kind of exciting thing. I've watched athletes I work with, like one of my guys I worked with during the Major League, soccer off season. And his career was tanking after he was this promising young player. And now he's one of the leading scorers in the league, so it's kind of fun to see that kind of stuff happen. And at the same time, I got other guys that are wrestling with deeper things like that. It's like watching athletes move into this phase of dealing with pro sports is just, it's a very, very desert like. I find myself telling athletes all the time, Jesus had a desert, you have professional baseball, where there's no certainty and you're a breath away from the death of your career at all times. And so it's this really profound place of learning, a really profound place of seeking a type of enlightenment and awakening. So it's been really fun guiding that. But I do particularly get fascinated by the super elite performers. Like I love seeing guys I had a guy go from, I hate soccer, I never want to do this again, to like comeback player of the year, and I love seeing that because there is a direct correlation between. So with this pitcher in particular, I can't wait to see what happens. I'm super, super, super pumped because it will confirm a lot of things for me. Because for me, it's a study. But yeah, I'm sure everyone, if everyone can watch and they'll figure out who it is. But like, yeah, I'm really, really, really pumped about that one. And I got kids working at the minor league levels right now. I got a guy that it's really fun to watch him wake up. He's got so much talent, and it's so fun to watch him. He's playing in a minor league soccer kind of situation, but he's this guy's got all this potential to play at he can go to Europe, he can play at the highest levels, and it's fun to watch him wake up and feel hope for the first time, start to rekindle a love for the game. So many of them hate the sports they play, so it's so fun to watch them actually all of a sudden go, I'm having fun. It's weird, cool.
Seth, does it ever go the other way where they decide to let it go?
It's a really good question, because when I first started working with athletes, I was doing some consulting with Major League Soccer in dealing with depression and anxiety and identity crisis when their careers are over. And I started to notice this unique type of trauma, and then noticing how much it affects, like there's this really profound question. Why doesn't that player live up to his potential? Why does he not get better? Why do so many players have promising young careers that become nothing what they were supposed to be? And I was listening to sports psychologists. I'm sitting in, you have to imagine me, I'm sitting in a room with about 15 other people. A bunch of them are PhDs and sports psychologists in a high rise in Manhattan. And we're all talking. And a lot of them, and I'm not joking, a lot of them believe that if you make them emotionally healthy, they'll just simply stop playing the game because their relationship with the game is so toxic. And at a certain level of psychology, that makes sense. If this thing is toxic for me and I come to the realization that it's toxic for me, I must leave the thing, like leaving a bad relationship, right? But I wanted to go deeper. And I remember one guy going, if we get him healthy, they'll just stop playing. He goes, and he said, and I quote, we got to keep them zombies at some level. Because they're all afraid that the players would lose their edge, lose their fire, because it was their trauma that gives them the fire. It's anger. It's this kind of stuff. And my theory, I was going, that's insane. And I said that, like, that's completely insane. I'm sorry. If we're doing damage to people, in our youth systems and we're accepting that, that's wrong. I said, so
it's like gladiator management.
Yeah. So I went deeper and going, I think if we fundamentally heal the trauma at the deepest level, not increase awareness of it, heal it, then we can actually reignite a loving relationship with something that is objectively good, which is sports are fun. Soccer is a fun game. We can watch it because I watch my 7-year-old play when we play in the yard, and he just laughs his butt off the whole time because it's so much fun. Well, what I found is that the work that I'm doing with athletes is deep enough that it's rekindling a deep love with the game, and so people are coming into this. I'm having so much fun, and when I check in with them, like I check in with this one guy who was probably the most high-profile player I've worked with. He came back and he's best 11, and he's a great player. And when I see him, it's like, how's your joy levels? He's like, so high, dude. I'm having so much. He told me I'm having more fun than I've ever had in my life playing soccer. It's just so much fun. And that's what I really, really love. That I think that true healing reorganizes our relationship, reorients us to these things. Sure. And he's just, that's my goal. This baseball player I'm working with, I've rarely worked with someone as driven as he is, like in the sense that he wants greatness. He wants Hall of Fame. He wants that kind of thing. He loves baseball and he wants to. And so, but now we're just trying to get it on a psychosomatic level. Can we make baseball safe for those young parts of him?
Sure.
Because clearly when he steps on the mound, his ego detects the trauma that's involved in that space. and says, we got to get you out of here. And so it's been injuring him over and over and over again, injuring him again. And a lot of players feel a sense of relief when they get injured. You know? So if we actually reorient them to, to something better, I mean, I've had players, I remember watching one player, it's like, yeah, well, I took a knock at the end of the game. And I'm like, okay. And I watched the game and I watched him take the knock and I could see it. He was relieved. He'd had a good game and he was a part of him going, thank God, I'm good now. I'm good. Okay, let me get me off the field. And I asked him, I said, did you feel like a sense of relief when they pulled you off the field? And he kind of paused. That's weird to say that. I think so. Yeah. Like, yeah. Right. Yeah. Because those young parts of them that are showing up in that trauma space just want safety and they want love. Well, what if we could heal all of them, bring them home, reintegrate those pieces of you? Well, then the one going out there is the warrior, the adult. Right. And then you can really battle and have fun.
Yeah. That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. That's so good. So I'll do my little check-in. Summer's been awesome. I took a break from the Voyagers podcast and I've taken a break from this podcast and I've been writing. I've been writing a film, and it's almost completely finished. The first draft. Met with my co-writer yesterday, and he's excited he's going to take the draft and he's going to start doing his thing with it. And so,
working title, Funeral Season, is this one we're talking about?
That's the working title. It's called The Funeral Season. Yeah, and it's kind of a dark comedy. And it's fun. Yeah, it's been fun, but it's been neat learning something that I've worked around TV and film my whole career. And it's been really fun to kind of get into the storytelling process, which is the thing I really like the most. And I'm having a blast doing it. So that's been a lot of fun. I have to complete that script here in the next 2 weeks and then I'm going to do a third season of The Voyagers. Got some interesting guests lined up. Got a couple movie stars, and I got some other stuff going on. So it's going to be fun. And so
can you drop some names on it? This is the MyPilgrimage audience.
The two stars are the two movie stars. One of them's confirmed, one of them's not. And so I'm not going to say anything yet. I'd like to just kind of reveal them as I go along. I do have confirmed, like one person who's an executive producer at DreamWorks Animation, and she's got some really interesting things to talk about. And there's some really fun stuff coming up. So that's gonna be cool. It's been interesting watching my kids. Kind of this first summer out, kind of post-COVID, obviously COVID's still happening and we have the Delta variant going around. And so that's causing a lot of kind of stress and panic. And Hawaii is still pretty tentative as far as states go, in terms of masks and mandates and stuff. But as things are lightening up and people are starting to do something, my middle son's at basketball camp in Oregon right now. And I've got, it's been really cool watching the kids kind of be able to get back to some semblance of sports and life. And that's been neat. Took a trip to Costa Rica. That was cool. Got a lot of traveling coming up in terms of I'm going to be doing some international traveling. So I will say this, that trip to Costa Rica, sucked it out of me in terms of I was shocked. I used to travel all the time. And a lot of you guys probably have experienced this or are going to experience this, that after a year and a half of just on this island and not having gone anywhere. I went up to Alaska to White Raven Center for a weekend. And then 2 weeks later, I'm off to Costa Rica. And it was intense, man. I gotta admit, it took a lot out of me. I physically just going, wow, flying and wearing the mask on the plane the whole time. And just, I came back pretty wiped out. And then Maria was like, hey, do you want to go to Oregon? And, because she's got to do this thing in Walla Walla, Washington. And she was going to drop off Noah. And I was like, no, I do not want to get back on a plane. So I'm not going to get on a plane till October. I get a nice long break here. So, but yeah, crazy. It's been neat. So, personally, in terms of my own kind of inner life and spiritual life, so I'm finding that transitions have never been great for me. I always struggle when I have to transition to it, and coming out of COVID and going back to normal life, I'm finding it's triggering me quite a bit. I settled into something really chill during COVID. And it was, even though I was challenging myself and doing stuff like the podcast and doing new things, I was doing it from my office and the computer, and I was doing it there's not a lot of pressure, you know what I mean? It was, but getting back to work, getting back to the business and the boat and being as busy as we've become, it's been a bit triggering. So I've had that come up in my meditations a lot. So, which I just been moving that, and I have my process moving energy. That weekend at White Raven was awesome. It was really helpful for that. So yeah, that's me, man. So
Nice.
let's move on to the question.
Let's have Jared illuminate and articulate his question.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it.
You don't have to put it in 140 characters.
No, I'm gonna read the question
probably
first, right off the Facebook group, and then
Okay.
we'll get into it and talk a little bit about kind of where it comes from, because it's really interesting and the title of the podcast will be, based on this question. So Jared Kroll posted on July 16th at 2:57 p.m. He asked a question. Hey y'all, haven't checked in here for a while, but I had a conversation today with my partner where I acknowledged a belief out loud for the first time that I still have, that has stuck with me from my teenage years in the church. The belief came from receiving teaching and, quote, scientific evidence, unquote, from pastors about how when I watch porn, it alters my brain to need new stimulus in order to be aroused, ultimately damaging my ability to be satisfied with one sexual partner and dooming my chances of being satisfied in a monogamous relationship. I have carried the fear of this being true with me and my brain now into my 30s. It has been controlling some of my behavior in relationships as I seek affirmation from partners that my desires are normal and not messed up from years of watching porn as a teenager/adult. I am wondering if anyone else here was taught this, if anyone knows the validity of the science behind these beliefs, and would appreciate anyone sharing about how it maybe affected their lives. Okay, Jared, do you have anything you want to add to there, or you want to talk, maybe elaborate a little bit on kind of your experience in the programming that you kind of had to deal with growing up?
Yeah. As I was writing that, I was thinking about like the timing of some of that training was a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So I would have been like, Every Man's Battle was like what I'm confronted with like 13, 14, 15, where I was snapping elastics on my wrists. And then in order to stop those desires, and then kind of later, like I want to say even into college, like university professors, because I went to a Bible college in Abbotsford, BC. And that's when I think I was confronted more with those like scientific beliefs that like, you're ruining your brain. The neuroscience is out that watching porn over and over and repeating that is changing your brain. Instantly need different stimulus. And so that kind of came like later, and I totally like I developed this idea that both like I feel out of control, I can't stop looking at porn, I need it for something and I don't know why. Right. And then but I'm also screwing myself over. And so then anytime I would enter a relationship, I kind of knew that it was doomed to fail from the start, because I was going to continuously be attracted sexually to other people that were around me. And that it was just eventually that relationship was going to blow up, and I would hide all of that from the people I was dating. It's like, I'm still looking at porn. I can't express any of my sexuality and be open about that. And so all of it was just being put into hiding. And then I mean, once you're inauthentic and not open, no love and connection can grow really in that kind of partnership. So eventually, right. They would end, but it's kind of come back up recently. And I think this belief has been affecting me unconsciously for the most part. Right. And then I've just had the freedom within the last week, like really think on it more clearly. And then told my partner that I think it's been affecting me in our relationship. And the way, I'm in a lot of those relationships that I was in were in Christian models where we're not having sex until we're looking at being married, where now I've moved out of that model. And so there's a lot more freedom to talk about sexuality in this partnership that I'm in currently. And I've been asking recently over the last couple years that I've been with my current partner, that I want it to be open. I want the freedom to be able to have sexual experiences with other people. Mm-hmm. And so I've been looking for polyamory style relationships for the last 2-3 years type thing. Mm-hmm. And I do wonder if that's partly because of this fear, mm-hmm. that I can't be committed. Sure. but then more, I think where I've noticed it affecting some of the things that I say to her is I'm like wondering if she's attracted to other people, because I'm looking for affirmation that it's normal for me to be attracted to other people
Sure.
well in a relationship. So I'm like, oh, like, were you flirting with that person? Yeah. And projecting that onto her, which I don't feel great about, because I'm looking for that affirmation that my desires for other people being in a relationship are okay, which is dominated by that fear that I've fucked my brain over from looking at porn for so many years.
Right.
And so I think I'm still sitting there. That's an accurate description of, like, I'm still sitting with this fear, that I've messed up this potential to be satisfied. And even when, like, I'm intimate, I'm like, oh, do I need to think about somebody else in order to be aroused and to be excited?
Sure.
And there's this deep desire to have, like, the openness and the opportunity for polyamorous relationships, but also this desire to be deeply satisfied with the intimacy that I'm experiencing with this partner who I care for immensely. And I'm wondering if that fear is getting in the way of being able to do that.
Well, you said you're wondering if that fear is getting in the way. Do you feel, like, let's just say from a practical standpoint, do you feel that right now that both those things are conflicting with each other? So are you experiencing less intimacy? Are you unable to experience the intimacy that you're desiring with your partner? And are you having the sexual satisfaction with the polyamory side of things? Or are you are either of these itches being scratched?
Right. It's interesting, like, in the last couple nights since acknowledging this out loud, the intimacy has changed and it's become deeper and more satisfying than I'd say it has been.
Sure. I think Seth probably has a comment about why that might be.
Yes, I do. Is this the time for it?
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm going to let it, because I know there's more Jared needs to talk about, but this is, let's just be clear. The reason we decided we wanted to have a conversation, and Jared, we really appreciate you being so open and honest, is because we recognized immediately that this is a thing that probably a lot of people in this audience are dealing with or have dealt with, that this is a general thing. And we could probably share our own stories of that kind of programming, the fear. I can definitely do that because I was married at 21. And I've been married for 24 years to the same woman. And I remember having to really work through that kind of as porn addiction was really rising in the church, and we were trying to figure that out. And there was no scientific anything about it. And nobody was, you know what I mean? The church kind of stepped into that space where science maybe should have been, and started giving this anecdotal bullshit, a lot of it, in its place. That was just, it was anecdotal. It was some youth pastor or some writer going, yeah, I'm having a hard time getting a hard on with my wife. And I think it's because I'm looking at porn. So that's kind of what happens to everyone. Right. So, Seth, what are your thoughts on what we're talking about? Especially the point where he said he voiced it for the first time out loud.
Right. Yeah.
And somehow it increased intimacy.
Those on the site that are familiar with Peter Rollins's work, he has a lot to say about that. The idea that the prohibition creates the problem. Right. Mm-hmm. So, and of course that is at some level, because what you're dealing with, Jared, is not brain chemistry. You are dealing with ego. You are dealing with how the ego functions in helping us survive what is unconscious, right? Most of what you're doing is coming from an unconscious space. You're dealing with and I know you've done a lot of healing, okay? But I can say, as someone who's 12 years into my healing process, there's still work to be done. I was just telling you guys about, I was being genuine when I said that hanging is triggering me. Like, I can feel fractured parts of me and hanging. Well, I felt it the other day because I was hanging some shelves and I made a mistake, and I ended up stripping a bolt. So it's like, oh God, now how am I going to fix this kind of thing?
Right.
And man, I felt, and a part of me distinctly felt like shame, like a failure.
Wow.
And that is not the feeling of a 45-year-old man. That's a young kid. Like, and Amy's like, you're okay. I'm like, some part of me clearly is not. Like, there is some part of me, and there is work to be done in that space. And so I continue to find little pockets of parts of me, I'll feel parts of me seeking affirmation. I'll still feel parts of me triggered by this thing or that thing. David can probably be on, what it's been something in my relationship with David at times, my brother, where there's still some part of me seeking my dad and will aim it at him or aim it at other people. And I'll feel those little tensions and go, okay, there's still work for me to be done. Well, sexuality is the same way. When your brain goes, but that person can give me what I need. That person can give me what I need. That person can give me what I need. That is just simply other parts of you seeking. It's not getting met here. Maybe it can be met there. And that's an egoic narrative designed to protect, suppress, and somehow help survive these younger parts of us. And I had a friend of mine, we had dinner a couple months ago and we were chatting about this, and it's the same kind of thing. He's been married for about 5-6 years now. And he's been working on his wife almost since the beginning, just working on her, saying, we've got to have an open relationship. And it's really fascinating because for him, it would always, we get together and he was doing the research and he's reading about how, historically, tribally, monogamy is not healthy and it's not a thing. And he had all his reasons and his points lined up, and he kept doing that. And I'm just like sitting there going, okay. And he finally, like, we had dinner a few months ago and he finally's like, yeah, she's open to it now. I'm like, oh, wow, you finally made it happen. Okay, awesome. I said, so what are you, he sees the waitress, right? And she walks away and I can see how his body's like, whoa. And I'm like, you gonna fuck the waitress? And he goes, well, I go, so it's just about sex. He goes, no, it's not just sex. He goes, I really want connection, like true connection, to have good conversation. And, and then, yeah, sex is a part of it, but then I can go home at the end of the day and be with my wife. And I go, she could be the dumbest person you've ever met in your whole life. And your brain is just making up a whole story, right? Your ego is making up a whole story about how that person is going to be this rich, beautiful thing, and there's going to be this connection, and because it's not here, it's going to be there. And your brain will keep doing that, and it will keep doing it, and it will keep doing it, and it will never stop until you deal with the source of it. And I relayed to him a story. I said, listen, about 7 years ago, I'm sitting in an intersection, and I think this will be meaningful to Jared. Like, I'm sitting in this intersection, and I've been doing my work for a while, and I'm working on this thing, and I'm observing my thoughts and my ego and all this stuff. And I was sitting at this intersection, and I finally realized how much I was always hunting. My ego was unconsciously hunting for its own affirmation, fulfillment, nurturing, grounding, everything I did not get from my parents all the time. And I'm sitting at this intersection, and across the intersection, there's a car parked at the red light across the intersection. And there's this clearly attractive woman in the car. And I'm sitting there, and my ego just pops up, and I had never noticed it like this, but it pops up and it went, maybe she'll look at you when she drives by. And I went, hey man, what the fuck? Like, I was like this, that's the most insecure thought I think I've ever had in my whole life. That's insane. Like, she's going to drive. I don't know that. I'm never going to see that person again in my life. And yet my ego is still trying to draw affirmation it has to draw it from an attractive female source somewhere. Right. And so I'm sitting there going, and I noticed it, and I spoke right back to my ego. Like, okay, that's crazy. Come on. Are we really that insecure? Right. And it became my goal from then on out. I'm not going to become satisfied with one woman. I'm going to be satisfied with myself. And I'm going to bring my sexuality into a space where it serves a greater purpose than meeting the needs of the fractured, traumatized parts of myself. There has to be a greater purpose here. It has to become something that I can wield as a beautiful tool for my own processes and my own transformation and my own enlightenment, rather than as something that is meant to pacify young parts of me. Which I think most people, we talked about this on the last podcast episode, we were talking about Horn Dog Dave. Remember? We were talking about Horn Dog Dave.
Yeah, who, by the way, is doing great.
Yeah, good. We talked about this, how the young parts of us most of the time hijack our sexuality. I think most people, they don't even begin to tap into what sex is really meant to be, because they're continually using their sexuality to parent themselves.
That's really well said, man.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and honestly, like, I have quite a few friends that are polyamorous, and my old neighbors, we would talk about this all the time, and I don't mean this in any way, shape, or form as a moral critique. It's not a moral thing. I have rarely, if ever, met someone who is in a polyamorous lifestyle who is not doing it unconsciously for the purpose of parenting themselves. It's almost exclusively. I've met maybe one person where I was like, okay, whatever she's doing is on this kind of crazy soul level, but she might just been able to dress it up in the right way. But this is the curse. And I always tell people about this quote in Star Wars: The Last Jedi when Rey asked, Kylo Ren, like, why did you kill your dad? And he says, because he goes, they're your greatest. He basically said it's a curse. It's your greatest weakness. You never stop needing them. He was talking about we never stop needing our parents. And I am amazed at the depths of that need that exists within me. I'm 45 and I've worked at it harder than most human beings to heal myself so that I can be solely content and unattached to these things, including my wife. And yet, I still find these parts of me. So the goal is here. Like, let's say that, okay, Jared, you're my client. Well, you and I have worked together years ago, right? I with clients all the time, I talk about, hey, let's create some boundaries for the ego to box it in so that we can actually work with it a little bit, because the ego at this point is telling you it's doing what it does. The ego's solution to all trauma is to fragment and compartmentalize, right? Which is essentially what polyamory is. I can compartmentalize these spaces and put these experiences here and somehow kind of keep them in this giant apartment building as long as everyone's in their separate rooms. When you say I'm going to enter into monogamy as a spiritual discipline, what it does is it tells the ego that we're not going to find our satisfaction anywhere, and I'm going to focus here and see. I'm going to let you squirm while you're trying to solve this problem of dealing with these fragmented parts of me, and then I'm going to continue to work to bring these pieces of me home, because until I'm satisfied within myself, I'm still an egoic being seeking to just survive trauma.
Yeah.
And that's in no way, shape, or form a moral judgment on polyamory. I have no judgment for it whatsoever. I just know this: like, I could have done that same thing, like what my buddy's doing. I'm gonna go and do all this kind of stuff, and then I'll be okay. Which, of course, he won't be. But what's fascinating is he had the same experience. I keep asking him, "Hey, how's the open relationship going?" You know what he keeps saying? He goes, "Man, ever since that she said it was cool, it's like I don't want it as much." Well, that's because the ego's like, "Well, where's the mystery, man? Like, where are we gonna actually?" That it has to be, because the ego is trying to create fantasical narratives. And once this is the beauty of grace. Once grace comes in, the shame is removed and all of it. And then you can finally see the ego for what it is. That this futile effort to solve a problem that can only be found within. Jesus says, seek the kingdom of God within you. And that's the only place we can find it.
Jared, what are your thoughts? I know I've seen you several times go, you have thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot's coming up. I think I loved the switch. For me, a huge just like realization of how much of that behavior is from an ego place, and then like that framing of I do intensely want my sexuality to move from a place of trying to satisfy egoic needs to the greater mystery of what sexuality can be. I think that's really exciting for me. And then the tough realization too of but even if that like that dream for affirmation or this idea of what poly is still just like reaching out desperately for those wounds. And I think I have a lot of consideration on what would that process be to use it as a spiritual discipline. I don't know. It feels a little fumbly for me to understand.
Interesting. While you guys are still contemplating and thinking, let me throw a few things out at you guys in terms of for the audience. So for the audience, just so you know, like there is scientific study now. There's stuff in the APA, the American Psychological Association, has lots of kind of studies and thoughts on it, and it's an interesting thing to look at it, because when they look at porn addiction, they talk about it similar to a substance abuse, but then they have these kind of other kind of points where they go, it's very much up in the air, and they admit that straight up. They say it's problematic because separate from a chemical substance abuse like drugs or alcohol, that kind of thing, you have these huge subsets of the population that have no problem looking at porn and being completely sexually satisfied. I wanted to share just a small piece of my own story in that I've been married 24 years. I'm a very sexually satisfied and happy married man, monogam. I've never, slept with anyone besides my wife outside, once we were married, and it's all been kind of a lovely thing. But I had a hardcore porn addiction for like 10 and a half years. And so, but one thing I found was I had no drop in sexual performance when I was actually with my wife. I never have. And it never seemed to interrupt. And even mentally and emotionally, somehow I had compartmentalized the two things. The big thing I found was that the part of me that wanted like fantasy, erotica, all that stuff like that didn't get to really kind of enter into the marriage part of it. It stayed in the porn part of it. And those two things were separate. So a big part of my healing process was that bringing in of all the other parts of me. And like Seth was talking about, kind of like just like welcoming home all these small parts of me and say, hey, we're not going to do that anymore. We're all welcome here. And my wife was a big part of that. And she was saying, hey, you're all welcome here. Everybody, all of it. She goes, you can. And so then I was given permission by myself and her to voice everything, every desire, every thought, like all of it out loud, which ended up being a massive catalyst for me being able to like mature as a man sexually, like, and become a really generous and kind lover, but also have all the kind of desires and be able to talk about any of it. And so it's that from that part of it, when I read the scientific studies on it, and there's tons on neuroscience of internet and pornography and internet addiction and that kind of stuff. I can see that the subjectivity of it and how it's really based in psychoanalysis and not necessarily kind of some chemical thing. I've heard stories, and like I said, again, I've heard these stories here and there, but they tend to always come through the evangelical Christian space about how like all you're going to want is the porn thing, because it's a really shallow way of understanding sexuality. It really, really is. It's kind of silly. That's actually not how it works. Like I look at my wife, and my wife's a 43-year-old woman, who's had 3 kids. So her body looks like a 43-year-old woman who's had 3 kids, and she takes care of herself. She eats well and stuff like that, but she's still like, she's got stretch marks and she doesn't look like any kind of my brain's able to look at if you see, I live in Maui, right? So I'm on the boat all the time. We get 20 somethings, gorgeous, influencers and all this other stuff in little bikinis and everything. My kids see bare butts all the time. And, and I look at it and all I see now, and I swear to God, all I see when I see that is, man, that looks like a lot of work. Like every time I see it, because we've gained such a level of intimacy in our marriage in terms of the sexual relationship, in terms of that, like I have come to a full realization that that's the product of what Seth just called the spiritual discipline of marriage. Like if you approach it that way, instead of a kind of a God divinely mandated, here's how you're going to do this. Instead, you look at it and you go, oh, there's a discipline to this. I chose this, right? And if I choose this, and inside that, I tell my wife, hey, look, I've got all these other desires and things that are going crazy. And yeah, I told my wife flat out when I finally realized I could talk about anything and I'm not going to get in trouble. I said, yeah, I'd have this desire to have sex with 2 women at the same time. And she goes, I don't want to do that. And she goes, I'm just not, that's just out of bounds. And the choice was, so if you want to do that, you can't be married to me at the same time. But it wasn't even like a judgmental thing. She just said, that's just not something I'm going to do. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and then the choice was easy for me at that point. Well, no, and it also was, I say goodbye to this thing, or I put this desire in the corner and go, that's not going to be a part of this life for me. But what it does is it just pushes the level of intimacy up with this one person. And I go, well, I'm going to focus on what do I get to experience here that I couldn't experience elsewise. And what I found is that deep, deep intimacy has become the thing I actually desire now. And so when I see those young, hot things on the internet or wherever they show up, I just go, I can see that it takes years to create that. Like you can't like just meet somebody like at a bar and go home and have sex with them. It might be a physically satisfying or exciting thing. It might be intense. It might be a lot of adrenaline involved. There might be something really awesome in terms of that experience, but you're not going to have that. I know every inch of your body. I know exactly how it works. I know exactly what you enjoy, and I have in the depth of that experience. That does take years, no matter what you do,
And And what
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
thinking about too, can I jump in?
Yeah, jump in, man.
Like when I'm attracted to this narrative that my
Mhm.
ego is telling me, like when I see something that's attractive and I start, the story starts running.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I have had experiences where that starts running and then I take a step towards it and then it plays out and it's always different than the narrative that starts running.
Right.
And yeah, it's my afterwards, the whatever I was, which started the narrative, the need or the hurt or the trauma that started the narrative.
Right.
The next morning or maybe even a week, like if or the relationship lasts a weekend, for example, it's still there.
Yeah.
It's
Doesn't-
not.
Yeah.
It's
Can't be
not
satisfied. Yeah.
No.
Can't be satisfied. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you
that's
create a
trauma.
new narrative in
That's
the process.
nature of trauma.
Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead, Seth. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm saying that is the nature of trauma, and that's one of the reasons we've worked as hard as we have to get people to, hey, let's go in. But I do recognize that most people have to run a narrative or run a certain kind of thing to its end before they fully go, okay,
right,
that's it. And again, that takes time. That's why the midlife crisis tends to be authentically at a certain time of life, because that's usually the end of people's narratives. Like I had someone contact me about life coaching recently. And she's very, 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 very evangelical, but she's really suffering. And she's like, okay, well, I really need help. We had a great conversation. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm like, great. So I put her on the waiting list. And then I contacted her this last week and said, hey, the week of the 26th, we can get started. And she said, no, I'm going to have to back out because, I've really been convicted by the Holy Spirit, that Jesus is all I need. Right. And all that. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing as porn. It's like,
right.
Oh, yeah, but didn't Jesus say that before? Yeah, but but she was, maybe this will save me, and maybe that will say it's that the narrative, and it's clear all she'll need to do is now she needs to go and suffer more before she goes, okay, now that it's still not working. So the question is, how long will you go before you go, this isn't working? Yeah, I've got to. This is about me. This is about going inward, and I'm going and understand that sexuality is not an event; it's a process, right? And that process can take place between two people in a really, really profound way. But if you're dividing your energies and you're splashing all over the place, it's hard to actually let it do what it's trying to do, right? Inside of you and inside, and it's not inside your relationship; it's inside of you. Right. Like the sexual relationship, a monogamous sexual relationship is best understood as two people working out a process, working out their salvation in a sense with each other. Right. And allowing, hey, you be my teacher and I'll be yours, and we can work this together. And it's a better way to learn in that space than it is in a divided space. Right. Yeah. For whatever reason, human beings are. By the way, I call that narrative you just described called the cosmic boyfriend narrative. That whole thing, it's the ultimate ego narrative in that you can take a perfect figure, a perfect man who in your mind looks really good too. And you put him so far ahead of you, so far into the future that he's literally not physically present, right? That you can then spend the rest of your life pursuing that guy and that perfection of that thing that he's all I need, and you can, and your psyche can just craft this perfect human being. And I've seen a lot of marriages in which that's taking place, and the husband is just this kind of secondary idiot compared to the perfect cosmic boyfriend. I tell a story about how my wife's grandparents, when grandma was dying and grandpa had dementia, but for years and years, all grandma talked about was Jesus, and I can't wait to see Jesus. Can't wait to see Jesus. Can't wait to see Jesus. That was her whole thing. And just, when I get to heaven. That's how our mother is, man. Yeah, right. Same thing, right? Same thing. Just can't wait to see Jesus. Since we were kids, can't wait to go home, be with Jesus. Can't be with Jesus. And I was always imagining, I was like, well, what do they expect? Like, what does that look like? Because I was there literally a couple days before she died, and she was in bed saying the same thing. And she had all these women around her saying the same thing. And meanwhile, her grandkids and everything, she's not paying attention to anybody else. She's just talking about Jesus. I'm just going to die. I can't wait. And this one lady sitting next to me, she's going, he's going to just wrap his arms around you and just give you the biggest hug. And it is going to be just amazing. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, this is creepy. It was really creepy. Like a spiritual orgasm. Yeah. It was like this whole kind of thing. Like you're going to finally get that real manly man is going to finally be there for you. And he's going to wrap his arms around you.
I mean, let's be clear. If your belief system, and there are many people who listen to this podcast whose belief system is that is what it kind of is. You die and you go to a place called heaven, and in heaven there's Jesus and he's waiting for you. Let's just be clear. If that's what's happening, then Jesus is going to have like about 5 minutes to hang out.
Because he's got trillions of
He's
other.
going to be like, great, I'm glad you're here. Great to see you. But there's literally trillions of people I have to go and just oversee. And I've got a lot to do. Like there's so much to do. You know what I mean? The narrative is so funky that way. We don't think it through. And it's like our egos don't, it's like exactly what you said, Jared. You were talking about how you'll do the thing the ego said would scratch the itch, and then it just crafts a slightly new narrative, another thing to pursue, another thing to kind of go for, and instead of allowing it to really just be satisfied. The only thing I've found in sexuality that is really satisfying is when I'm with my wife and I'm fully, completely present with her. Like I'm really there. Like my mind is nowhere else. And that I have found is part of my meditative discipline. So I actually like breathe while, when we're going to make love or something, I actually center myself and breathe. And I've come to this very present, turn off work, turn off everything else that's going on and just be fully there. And that's the thing that tends to work. And I think about, my mother, just thinking about Jesus 20, whatever many years before she dies into the future and going, she's just the opposite of being present. She's an addict.
Yeah. And that's essentially what addiction is. And it's not a brain chemistry thing. In the end, this is the fascinating thing about the brain chemistry thing,
right?
Is that in the end, do we choose?
Mm-hmm.
And that is an issue of consciousness, not brain chemistry. If someone, because people would say, if you choose, say, okay, the girl across the intersection from me, all I had to do was notice. I could have easily said, well, that's because my brain chemistry has been altered and it's looking around those places. But in the end, do I choose? Do I choose what I give my attentions to, or do I not? And in the end, like even a drug addict. Okay, I'm working with a lady who's a cocaine addict right now.
Right.
And in the end, we've talked a lot about, she lives on the east side of the mountains and her dealers are on the west side of the mountains. So we talk a lot about what happens at the past. Because I said, at what point, she goes, my brain just gets going and I can't stop it from thinking about where I'm, who I'm going to call and how I'm going to call them and where I'm going to go and where I'm going to head. I go, at what point on I-90, the highway that connects the two, at what point on I-90 do you start to think? She goes, no, somewhere around the pass. I go, well, where around the pass? Like right before you get to the top of the pass, at the very top of the pass, the second you start heading down the hill, at what point? She goes, when you turn past the ski resorts and you start that long, fast stretch downhill, she goes, about right there. I go, wow. So it's literally like a downhill motion of thought. She's like, yeah. I go, well, I wonder if we could bring our awareness to that space. So I said, the next time we drive around the mountains, and what we did, the next time I said, I want you to pull over at the top of the mountain. You're going to pull over at the top of the pass and we're going to meditate. And we just brought our awareness in. She's like, literally did. She goes, I pulled over. I just sat there and just watched my thoughts go. I'm like, all right. And you're just sitting there. And instead of rolling down the hill, you're standing there watching your ego do what it's doing. The question is that a choice? Right. Or is it not a choice? So even with something like cocaine that clearly has such a profound effect on the brain, just like an orgasm does.
Yeah.
Right. The question is, can we observe it or can we not observe it? Like with you, Jared, like the next time your brain goes, maybe she could be the one, maybe she could make the question is there something watching that? Is there something aware of it? And do you have the courage to go, all right, ego, here's the rules you're going to abide by. And I'm going to show you who's in charge. And it's not a moral thing. It's simply going, this is a hierarchical thing. Who runs this show? The ego run the show, or is the spirit in charge? And if we can come to that point where we can finally let sexuality be the thing, it's not meant to be the most profound part of our lives.
Right.
It's, you know what I mean? It's not. There is something deeper. This is why the truly enlightened ones tend to finally push past all that stuff and go, okay, I think I'm gonna go somewhere deeper,
right?
And lose those attachments. The question is whether you can observe it or not. And this is not a conversation between you and your partner. It's not a conversation between you and anybody else. It's a conversation between you and your ego.
That's it.
And that's it.
And then a little bit tying it back to my original question about this brain science, the neuroscience. Yeah. I think that's even a belief that my ego attached to to keep me in the pattern potentially. It was like, oh, but your brain's messed up, so you gotta like keep attaching, keep spreading it out. And it's like a defense strategy.
Yeah.
That's just the ego creating another belief system, just like any other religion. That's why the no-fap guys who are not religion, the no-fap thing is the same religion, the brain chemistry thing, the SA thing. It's all religion.
Right.
Belief systems create an attachment to them, and then we are a slave to them, as opposed to a profound level of freedom where we can go, becomes a very kind of shallow thing.
We lost you after you said a profound level of freedom.
Freeze.
We went into another internet fart.
Yeah. Well, and I just, you guys know, I got about 5 minutes.
Yeah. Go ahead and wrap us up, man. I think we've kind of run this.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, though, okay, so Jesus, when we talk about being free, okay, even when this lady's like, Jesus is all I need, I remember a passage, I can't remember where it says, "He who the Son sets free is free indeed," right? That was a freedom on multiple levels. There's freedom of thought, there's freedom of belief systems, there's freedom of philosophy, there's these kind of freedoms that we talk about where we're free to think, we're free to desire. Like Jared, you've discovered this profound desire. I can desire what I want. I have no shame or guilt or anything like that. I can have what I want and do what I want, and that type of freedom, that's freedom, right? Now the thing is, in your journey, you've hit a spot. Okay, is there any deeper freedom available to you? Of course there is, right? And then every time you get to the spot, you can go, hey, is there a deeper freedom available to you? Of course there is. Yeah. We can keep going until, I mean, you and me could be like 80 and 90 years old, like sitting on a porch, sipping a whiskey, and hey, you think there's any deeper freedom available to us? Of course there is.
Dude.
Right? The question is, what do you want in the end? And how much time would you like to spend in this current space before you go to that space? I mean, even Dave, when you talk about going back into work and kind of stress and that kind of thing, you had this interesting experience last year. We had a glimpse of a type of freedom that you maybe hadn't experienced before, and now the question is there a deeper freedom?
Absolutely. And for me, I want to say this because the metaphor for me is always like when I would climb mountains in Alaska, go back into the Chugach Mountains, I was always like you'd climb a peak and there'd be this epic view, and you had to work really hard to get up to the view. And so but every time you got to that view, you'd see another peak and you go, do I want to see what the view looks like from there? Yeah. You had to make a choice of, well, this is an amazing view, but do it. And it's going to take work. I mean, there's going to be some pain and some discipline, and there's going to be this thing to get to that view. I was always the guy that was like, hell yeah, I want to see the next view. I want to keep going. And I would keep going and keep going and keep going. Cause I wanted until I got to this point where I was like, wow, I've hit the highest peak in this ridge and I'm seeing the best view you can. And I'm so glad I did. And I'm exhausted and blah, blah, blah. I view marriage very much that way now. Like I look at it and I go, the biggest challenge I see now in terms of sexual intimacy is actually what's happening in my physical body. Like I'm getting older, like I'm aging now. And I'm starting to age and going, oh, this is another kind of cool little discipline that's being kicked in here, in which how do we maintain intimacy as our bodies begin to diminish? How do I physically diminish and spiritually grow? And how does intimacy grow? Because if you read a lot of studies, like you'll see that like a lot of people say that they're very sexually satisfied in their 60s and 70s and stuff. And I go, how do I get there? And that's become the physical part of it, the sexual part of it is that way. And I'm starting to realize that it's going to become more and more spiritual. It's going to become more and more, spiritually intimate. If I'm going to experience that, I have to continue to allow myself to experience disciplines in that way. So,
Jared, why don't you conclude, man? You wrap us up.
Yeah. Jared's going to finish it. Boom.
Wrap this up. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, Seth, since I've connected with you, and
yeah, it's good. It's good to connect with you, man.
It is, yeah, and I haven't.
I'm a fan. I gotta be honest. I'm a fan.
It's really refreshing, I think, just to remember how strong the ego can be, and I'm excited. I'm sitting here quite excited. I'm just like the refreshing feeling of stepping forward into that process again and seeing. I've been reaching out in so many ways, not just in this like polyamory journey, but also in like stepping into different communities and like asking for a lot of my needs to be met. And I think I'm leaving here just like excited to like sit with that and see some of those traumas for what they are, and for how those needs are just like desperately wanting to be met, and seeing what new freedom I can step into as I process some of those traumas again. And excited for the growth that comes from that. I have pretty strong memories now of how the change comes, and the energy that can come. I'm tackling one big thing that's happening in my life is I'm stepping into being an elementary teacher, and I'm terrified of failing in that. And I know I'm looking forward to what this will reveal, and the man and the teacher that I will get to be, the service I get to provide, and the learning I get to provide for some students. And I think this is all part of stepping into that role. So
that's awesome.
That's awesome. Some of this stuff, and that'll be another journey in and of itself too.
Absolutely, dude. The kids are elementary school kids. They're pretty forgiving if you're honest. I taught school for many years, and they're great.
Okay.
They're chill about it. So you're gonna do great.